Everybody, welcome to the channel. In this one, we're going to be creating a robot. You guessed it. And especially the Mech Warrior style robot. That was the EV engine. This is the EV engine. That was Cycles. I really like this. I set it up actually for EV. I did an iridescent volume and baked out the lighting and then put in some volumetrics. Now, if you don't know anything, this is going to be a Blender beginner friendly tutorial. I'm going to go step by step, and we're actually going to create a very basic beginner robot first, and we're using reference images to do this. Now I've got the reference images like this one, and we're going to use this to model out. Now the fun thing is, all of the tools that are used for the most popular hard surface modeling tools like box cutter, grid modeler, and whatever else is out there, they're all using the majority of that is Blender's internal functions. So if you come over to preferences, add-ons, and you type in Carver, this is something that is static. It's inside Blender already, and it's got a number of hotkeys and stuff, so it's very easy to learn, very quick. And we're going to use that in a destructive manner, so you have non-destructive and destructive, to create this battle mech. And then I'm going to show you how to keep it clean along the way, so that later we can put some cool textures on it, put some decals, and just overall have this thing looking really cool and have a nice product at the end. This is my EV final render for this one. And then I have my Cycles final render. And the Cycles lighting is more realistic. Everything's more realistic. And the EV is technically a little bit more cartoonish, even though I kind of made it look a little bit more like Cycles. And I'll show you how to do that too. So let's jump right in. All right, so I start out the viewport like this. I don't even have the default cube there, because if it was there, right? If it was there, I would have just deleted it, have all my settings the way I want, and then I come to File, and then I go to Defaults, and then I save my startup file, and then you have to click it again. And if you save it, whatever settings you leave the viewport with, even if there's a model there, it's still going to come back every single time. So if you were on Cycles, you liked 100 samples, your denoise, and all these different things, which we'll cover, are all the way you want them, then you can save that startup file and load it up like this every time. Now, if you are brand new to Blender, the middle mouse wheel will move you around in the viewport. Shift middle mouse will move the entire viewport. Obviously, the middle mouse will roll you in and out. And then, really important, if you're not doing this, this is the workflow for the majority of Blender users. So if you come into Preferences and go to Key Map, what you want is your mouse button to be on right. Okay, so you want to be able to select things with the right and then move the 3D cursor around with the left. Now, so you guys can follow along, I'm going to turn on my screencast keys. And down here in this little corner, you'll see what I've got. It's going to be a little mouse, so every time I click something, it'll say what I did, and it'll show the button, like that's left mouse, right mouse, middle mouse wheel is being clicked. And then when it's rolling, you don't see anything, but you do have the typing, and so you can kind of see what's going on. So if I hit M, you can see that M has popped up, and now that's cool. So, and that's the powerful way to work, and then spacebar search. But what we're going to do is we're going to set up a few things first. Now, Shift S will, now I have a little bit of a different menu because I'm using machine tools, but it's all the exact same thing. If you hit Shift S, you can move your cursor to the origin. So if you left click off, it's a real pain. So Shift S, cursor world origin, very simple. And then if I Shift A, drop in a cube, and I don't want that cube there, well, I can Shift S and bring the cursor, you can see a little cursor sign here, to the origin. Then with this selected, I can hit Shift S and bring that to the cursor, and it will center it perfectly, and that's what we've got. Now, a few things before we completely set up and roll here. There's a couple of different options we're going to work with. One is we're going to turn off, this is the viewport shading. You have a solid view, you have a rendered EV view, which is technically a real-time renderer for the most part, and then you have cycles. And cycles is going to somewhat be a little bit more pixelated in the viewport, but it's going to give you a render, and it's wonderful for showing shading errors. So right here, I went ahead and added an extra face here, and we'll go over stuff like that later. But if you come over to solid view, you don't see it. There's an extra face there. So you could press Z and go into wireframe, and you still don't see it. So that could be a little bit confusing. And so what you want to do is understand, so you can't even see that in Eevee. You can only see the rendered problems in cycles. So every so often, come over and check out your model and see if you have shading errors this way. There are other ways also, and this is some of the preliminary stuff you're going to want to learn. If you come in back over here to solid view and drop your viewport shading down, you can switch to metcap, and then click the shader ball here, and the red one for the studio lighting works a lot better. It basically has a shiny little studio light that looks like a stop sign, and if it's stretching, bending, or otherwise out of that shape, then you will realize you have a shading error. But that doesn't mean anything for this extra face that's there. You can't see that. And later when we're doing the shading of our model, this is going to throw you for a major loop and be a big pain. And so what you can do is go into edit mode. You can come in here, and there's a good option for this. Just hit X, and you'll have your delete menu. It'll delete vertices, edges, faces, or it will dissolve vertices, edges, faces. And there's some other functions that we may or may not cover in this tutorial, but the main ones you're going to use are to delete or to dissolve those faces. Now this face here, I just want to delete that face. That was a face that was just on top. And now my mesh is all one solid color, okay? And now I don't have that shading error. If I come back, well, I still have all the pieces here. And another way you can do that is if you want to grab one of these in edit mode, and that's a switch up here between object and edit. These are the two main modes that we're going to be using. What you can do is you can hit tab, and tab will actually bring up a pie menu for object, vertex, edge, and faces. Yours will look just a little bit different, but it's all the same features. So I can switch back to object mode, and I can't individually select those faces here, but I can if I go over to edit and face select. Now you can hit H to actually just hide that. You can just hide it and inspect your mesh if you ever need to, because in the beginner realm, what you run into a lot is you're creating a lot of faces. By accident, you may have moved something slightly off. So when I Alt H and bring that piece back, you know, maybe I accidentally separated or something. And so it creates a lot of problems. And so you want to be able to fix that. So I'm going to Control Z back, and Alt H will bring back that face. Now I'm going to shift. If I hit tab and I shift my mouse up, I can just quick swipe these things. So if I swipe to the left, I've got face, and then so on for object mode and everything else. Or you can just hold down tab, and then you'll end up in that area as well. Very useful. Now another thing you want to do as a beginner is go to edit, go to preferences, and under the input, you know, if you have a laptop, you can click to emulate keyboard. That's going to give you camera angle access to the top row of your numbers if you don't have a number pad. So that will be very helpful for you there. Now you can come to System, and I've got my GPU and my CPU selected under the CUDA here. So that works good for me because that's my graphics card. Another big thing you want to do is learn to have your undo steps to something pretty high. Now you want to create save points too, but this is a pretty important thing. So if this is pretty high, like, and I'm just going to X out, but if you have the save option, autosave on, all you have to do is hit the X. But I would put that to something like 100. I have mine at 125, even though I'm using machine tools and I have an automatic save every 2 minutes. Still, it's good to have those undo steps. You don't have to search for anything. So what I want to do is I'm going to swipe over to vertex mode, and I'm just going to move a few of these around. And obviously that's now completely out of shape. And then I want to swipe over to face mode, and I can grab one of these and hit E to extrude that. And now I've extruded that face out. And let's say I really just didn't mean to do that. It's just a cube, right? You can start over. But if it's not a cube, then you can hit Control Z and come all the way back. And just hit Control Z and see what I'm doing down here. Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, Control Z, until you're back all the way. And it'll even undo and or redo selections. So this is important. If I just wanted to select, and I'm holding Shift, right mouse to select or deselect a face, and then middle mouse to move over. So if I Shift, right click, and then Shift, right click, now I've got all these selected. But let's say I just accidentally clicked off in the viewport. You do not have to go back and select all those faces. Hit Control Z, and now you've got what you need. So now one more thing we're going to do before we actually jump into the tutorial is we're going to set up a quick menu. So I'm going to swipe back up to object mode. I'm going to go back out of this because it's annoying to the eyes. And what we want to do is hit Q. All right. Now, this is the quick favorites. I've got an annotation in here so I can kind of direct you guys and say, hey, go this way, and do all these different things. You don't really need those, but the quick menu itself is going to have a lot of different things. Now, this menu is different if I go tab and go into edit mode and hit Q. I've got a whole different set of quick favorites. And so that is how that's going to be. You've got the object mode quick favorites, and you've got the edit mode quick favorites. And setting this up beforehand is going to really remove a lot of headaches. So if you hit spacebar and you search, from here you can type in the very first one, which would be shade smooth. Okay, and then you can right click on that and then add that to favorites. Then another one you're going to need is to extrude faces. And see, I can't get anything here because that's object mode. Extrusions are for object mode. So if I come over here and hit spacebar search, and if you followed along and you set your spacebar to search, you can follow along very easily. Then I type in extrude faces, and a bunch of things will pop up because you cannot extrude in object mode. So I want to grab extrude faces along normals and add that. All right. And now I want to also add edge bevel weight, and you can right click and add that to your favorites. And if I come back out, we can see these are all the different ones. I want you to go through and grab the checker deselect, the invert, symmetrize, because we're gonna need most of these, circle, then bridge edge loops, which is really cool. I'll show you bridge edge loops real quick because that one is super powerful. So if I just shift right click both of these faces, I could tap I to inset them. Okay. And now I can press X and go to that delete menu and delete those faces. Now the cool thing is when you have inside of Blender, you have vertices, you have edges, and you have faces. And each one of these can be selected by pressing 1, 2, or 3. Now, if you have a laptop like me, I've got my little 3060 i9 with a very nice, it's a pretty nice little computer, and I don't have a number pad. I can hook one up if I want, but I don't like it in my workspace. So I use hotkeys to do these different things and go to the edges vertices. So tab to edge mode. Now I can shift alt and then right click and select that entire face. And now I can do the same over here. And there are obviously other hotkeys to select those at not necessarily at the same time, but even easier. And we'll get to that. So now if I click Q and go to Bridge Edge Loops. And then I'll swipe back up to Object Mode. I've now made this effectively look like a concrete block. But that's what Bridge Edge Loops will do for you, and it does that in a number of different ways. Like if you're making a coffee cup handle, you can bridge the edge loops. Really cool, really fun thing. And so I'll jump back over, and what I want to do is go back through this. Got a grid fill, which is pretty cool. All right, so I can go ahead and delete that, and I'll hit Shift A, and I'm going to drop in a UV sphere. Now select the object. I want to tab over into face mode. And what I want to do is teach you another thing we're going to be doing. And if you grab any face in here, you'll deselect all this, or you can hit A, or you can double tap A. Now I'm going to box select, and the way I have it set up, it automatically does it. But if you don't, you can hit B, and then the crosshairs will pop up, and then you can box select anything you want. Now I'm going to tap F to make that a face. And that works a lot of the time, and then you'll be able to scale this thing in and out. You can hit G to move it up and down and do a bunch of different things. You can constrain it to an axis by hitting Z, and the Z axis will constrain it. I can constrain it to Y if I wanted to make something weird, or X, but Z is good enough, and so I'll bring this up to here. And now I have a move menu. I'm not really going to work with that. And I want to just hit X and delete that face. Now I'll go to Edge Select, and I want to grab, you got to be very careful not to grab an inside loop. You just want to grab the loop you're shooting for. So Shift Alt, and you can double click the double right click, or sometimes a single works good, and then hit Q. And I want to go ahead and grid fill this. And as you can see, I've now got a grid, and I'll hit Z and go over to wireframe so you can see this a little more pronounced. Now, one of the purposes, just one, is for the grid fill, I want to line up the geometry. So I am able to do that here, and I can kind of shift the geometry around, and I can twist it and offset it. I can bring the loops down to like maybe 4, and then start moving this thing around and kind of line them up a little bit better. And that could be very useful for a number of applications that we will get into another time. But that way you know how to do the grid fill. So, a couple things. If you hit Q now, you can actually shade that smooth. Now, it doesn't look very good. We don't really see our edges. And so what we're going to do is we're going to bevel that real quick. So let's go ahead and add a bevel modifier, which is over here in the modifier panel. Click Add, click Bevel. And now these edges are much more pronounced. A few things you got to do with the bevel modifier. One segment isn't good, because what you're doing is you're creating an overlap here. So if I go into wireframe, you can kind of see what the bevel has done. And Control middle mouse will zoom in so you can get in a little bit closer. And it's added another loop right here. And if I add another one, it just added yet another. So 2 is okay, 3 isn't too bad. Try to keep these to even numbers and keep it either 2, 4, 6, 8. Don't really need too many more than that for what we're doing. If you put more in there, you've got a lot of extra geometry you really don't need. So if you drop down, and let's jump back over into solid mode. If you drop down geometry, this will just be useful later for some of the closer angles, especially when we start cutting booleans and building the mech. You go from sharp to arc, and that's going to get in corners when we have more square and rectangle corners. And we definitely want to turn off grid, the clamp overlap. And what you see is a very, very deformed mesh. And so you could go in and do a bunch of cleanup, but you're beveling. So what you're doing with the bevel is you're actually overlapping the geometry. The geometry from the bottom and the top is overlapping the actual bevel and creating a lot of shading errors. So what you want to do is you want to come up here under the amount and hold down Shift, and then left click and hold it, and then drag this back. And now that kind of corner right there isn't too bad. That's pretty nice. So you just have to see what you can get away with on your actual mesh and how it's going to look. And I could bring that down to, and if you get into trouble and you really can't get the shading to go away, 0.001 would be the lowest bevel that you could do, and so then it would be very pronounced. But we try to add just a little bit more so it's kind of cushioned around there and has a nice transition and looks good. Now, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's this kind of shading lines up and down. And if we go over into edit mode and click into edge, you'll see that we just have these lines going up and down, whereas we have more square type geometry here. And what you want to do is press Control R, and now your middle mouse wheel will add more loop cuts, and just try to match it up with what you've got. And once you've got that, you can left click, and then before you finish, you can move this around. But as you see, when that loop cut hits the bevel, you get more shading errors and artifacts. So you want to try to just right click, let go of that, and you don't have to move it. It's going to be automatically centered. So now if I go back into object mode, you don't see those lines going up and down because we added some nice geometry to that. Now, a cool thing you can do, and we're going to do this a lot, is you can jump into edit mode and you can grab face select, and if you grab in the middle here, right here, not these loops that are going in a circle, but the ones that are going straight across, up and down, hold down Shift Alt and click that. You can add it in, and what we want to do is hit Q and we'll extrude faces along normals. Now you got to hold down Shift really to get this to work right. And as you see, if you go up or down holding Shift, you're going to move all of those faces at once, and the bevel is automatically applied. So if I move that in, let go of Shift, left click, move back to object mode, now I've got a really nice bevel, and I just added some extra details. All right, let's build a practice mech. This is going to be a lot of fun. So let's do 1 for your front view, okay? And then if you press 3, it's going to switch your view to the side, which would technically be the left side of the mech, but the right side to you, you're facing that right side. Now let's make that make sense. If you press 1 and Shift A, drop in a cube. Let's kind of scroll out a little bit. Now let's hit Tab and go into face select or anything in edit mode, doesn't matter. Hit A for all, so you've got all this selected, and then hit G and Z and you can move this up. Now to make this easy, I just right click drop that. To make this easier, you can turn on snap, and if it's on increment, it'll just snap up for you. So I'm going to hit 1 for the front view, A for all, G and Z, and it will just start snapping up. And I can left click and place it perfectly on the line. Now what that does for us, if we snap back over to object mode, is if I grab this and scale this on the Z in object mode, then it's not going to move on that axis if I scale it on the Z. And a cool thing to note, if I scale this here, it doesn't really follow that, but you do not have to apply the scale. If you do happen to scale this in object mode, which we're going to be doing both, then you have to hit Control A and apply the scale. Don't do an all transform, you're going to throw your mesh for a loop. So just hit 1. Let's go over and add a modifier. And it'd be really fun if this is your first modifier ever. What you want to do now is jump over into edit mode. Make sure you hit A for all, pick up that front view 1, G, and Z. And now what that's going to do is it's going to move your original to the right. Make sure the selected one is to the right, and then the mirror is going to be on the left. And so we kind of spread this apart. We still have snap-ons, so you probably want to turn that off so you can get a little smoother transition. And we want to work from the center and have everything perfectly centered because we want our mech to be symmetrical. And you can fix that at the end, but it's really not worth the effort because there's going to be a lot of moving parts. And so if I hit I with that face selected and left click drop it and hit E to extrude, I am now working on both sides perfectly. All right, so let's grab the top face here in edit mode. So make sure you're on face select and grab the top face only. Don't have anything else selected. And hit 3. And then shift middle mouse and bring this down, kind of zoom out just a little bit. Hold down Control and then left click. And what just happened here, if you hit middle mouse wheel, kind of shift the screen around, you'll see that you literally just made an extension. It extended, automatically extruded towards the cursor. All right, and so it's a little tricky. It's a fun thing you can learn. This is just a little cheat method we're going to use for right now to kind of build the legs out. And so what I can do here is I can inset this one a little bit as well, press 3 again, and then I'll put the mouse like somewhere above it, and then just left click one time. And now I've got that piece, right? And it's all perfectly centered. And so this is acceptable. You could do this type of modeling. It doesn't hurt anything, even though we're going to be modeling in a more advanced way later. So from here, you could hit E to extrude and then hit S to scale it. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring your geometry out just a little bit. And from here, you can hit E to extrude that one more time. And now you've got this little knee joint, if you will. And you can go back to 3 and then Control left click. And that's pretty good. You've got some mech legs now. It's very, very easy to do. So I'll tab back, go to object mode. I want to take up the top view. Kind of shift middle mouse, zoom in. I always like having a good view. I don't want to fight it. And shift A, and I'll go to mesh. I'm going to drop in a UV, hang on, a cylinder. And I want to rotate this by pressing R. It will just rotate. I'm going to see, you can see that a little bit better. So if I hit R, it's just going to rotate wherever. But if I hit X or Y respectively, it will rotate. Now we want this to be our little chassis connector, so we want it on the Y, and press 90 for 90 degrees and hit enter. And now that actually looks pretty good. So if we hit S to scale this and then X, it will scale out for us. And we can scale it just a little past the feet. And we want everything centered. That's kind of the workflow here, so we can kind of work from the middle and everything is symmetrical and nice. Now what we can do is kind of zoom out and just hit G and Z to bring this up, and then G and Y to bring it back. Now you can hit Q. You can shade that smooth. You can come down to the triangle area here if you wish. It'll make it look a lot better. And what you could do is start to use, drop down the normals and start to use auto smooth. And what that does is it makes it have a more hard surface appearance to it. And all this is pretty sharp right now. None of it looks great. So what we want to do is I'll shade the feet smooth too. Okay, and it looks crazy, but just click auto smooth. And now what you can do is you can add that famous bevel modifier to the feet. And so let's add the bevel. And you'll see what we have is just the one segment. Now the mirror can be above the bevel, but the bevel will likely need to be above any other modifiers in the stack, and we'll come to that later. So I'm going to add 4 segments, shift middle mouse, kind of bring this back. Something like that looks pretty good. And now I want to bring down the shading. You can harden the normals, which will remove some shading errors. Pull down geometry, go from sharp to arc. And it's kind of hard to see, but this is the example. Control middle mouse, let's go in. So right here, if I go back to sharp, you can see this line. There's a shading error there. Let's see if I can switch back over to the met caps. Yeah, you can see that pretty pronounced there. So if I go from miter outer from sharp to arc, it completely removes that. And best case scenario, it at least makes the area look a lot better. So we can check our shading and we can see we do have some stretching going on here, but that's just for the way we did this. We're not going to have too many of those issues in the main mech body, but you know, go through some fundamentals here first and then get you there, because you can always add all those loop cuts and geometry later, and the bevel is going to help clean up a lot of this. Now I can collapse geometry. Note, not yet. Go to clamp overlap and turn that off. Remember, that's one of those things you want to be able to identify if there are actual shading errors and overlaps. and that literally means clamp overlap, right? So we want to keep that looking good. Now I can collapse that, and do want to take a look. Let's see, nothing else really needs to be changed here. So that looks good. Now if you want to transfer this bevel, you're going to want to grab the object you want to transfer it to, and then shift right click the object that has the modifiers. Now watch, this does have a mirror, so when you transfer this, the bevel's going to transfer. So if I hit Control C and copy modifiers, you're going to think you got shading errors, but just right click this and delete that mirror and you'll be just fine. You don't have any problems. Now later you're going to want to join some parts, and this is going to be so important to having a nice looking mech body overall. And so if I was to join this one, let's just say it had a much bigger bevel than this one, and hit Control J to join them, and yeah, my mirror disappeared. It's okay. I'm going to end up on bigger mesh with shading errors, and it's not going to work out. The bevel can be close, and it's not too much of a big deal, but you're going to want to make sure these bevels are almost identical. So when you're going through here, you copy those modifiers, and you can do that to all of them at one time. So if we have 20 different objects, you can copy all 20 objects. And let's just, for the fun of it, add in another cube right there. And if I hit A for all and then shift right click, this is the active object. Now this has all the modifiers, and if I had extra modifiers, of course it's going to transfer all of them. Now if I hit Control C, it'll copy all of those. Now I don't need the mirror for all those, and I would have already applied the mirror anyways, so that won't really be an issue later. But you can see everything will have its own individual bevel modifier, but they'll all be the same. So Q would shade that smooth, and then vertex area under normals, you would click auto smooth and get some very, very nice shading. And then the shape language will start to match up with what you're doing. So I very randomly placed that, and I think I actually got it almost perfectly centered. So Shift S, go back to the origin, and I actually want to take the selected to the cursor and make it perfect, as we're not doing anything haphazard or halfway here. And then G and Y will move that back, and you can see I'm on the Y axis. All right, so this would be what the legs would turn on, and we'll worry about all that a little bit later. So I want to jump into edit mode with this and grab the edges at the bottom, and see there's a little selection there. It's white. Yours may be a different color, but this one's white, and I'm going to shift right click until I just have those two selected. And now I want to scale that on the Y axis and kind of bring it in. And it's okay that it's in the mesh, it really doesn't matter. And I've done a lot of scaling here, so I want to make sure to apply the scale to everything, because you see there was actually a shading shift there. It corrected it because I applied it, and now it looks even better. So if you don't apply your scale, you're going to have a problem, and that is predominantly with the with texturing, with all kind of things, especially the bevel modifier. So real quick, we're just going to finish this guy up, and I'm just going to work from the cube, and it doesn't have to be too much. I want to hit E and S to scale that, E to extrude, and then I've got a very basic body. And then I'm going to right click, shift right click these two faces. I'll hit I to do an inset, and then G and Z, and I can kind of move these up a little bit without messing up the bevel. Let's see, I don't want to destroy my bevel. It's really not doing what I want. So what we can do is I'll actually Control Z back, and I want to, and this is all for training, Control R, and I'll add in a loop cut sideways, and I'll roll the middle mouse wheel up twice and then double click that. And now I've got loops on both sides, and now my bevel will be more protected. I won't be moving it. If I tab back over into face, and I just select these two, I can hit I to inset that. And now what I want to do is scale that on the Y and kind of bring that in just a touch. Something like that is fine. And now I can hit Q and extrude these along nominals, and that'll allow me to bring both of these out at the same time. Boom. And so now I've got a very basic mech structure going on here. And now this placement doesn't have to be as perfect. I'm just going to go ahead and throw in a cylinder and rotate that on the X at 90, scale it on the Y, shade it smooth and auto smooth. Shift right click here, Control C, copy modifiers, and boom, now that's over there. Now this is all part of the workflow, so you'll get this. And now I want to mirror this, since I have a chassis piece now, and I want to use the one piece that isn't going to really move. And so that's the non-moving piece is the one I mirror from. So I'm going to grab the mirror and I'm going to select here. That's my chassis. And so now I've got these two pieces, and I've got a very, very basic mech. It doesn't look like he could stand up on his own, so I'm actually going to go into face select, and I will extrude this back just a touch. And then I want to add Shift R. I'll put in a loop cut right there. And then I want to select both of these faces. And I'll take up a top view, and I will extrude that out. And I want to go tab, edge select, and there's a bunch of ways to do this kind of stuff. And I'll hit G and Y to move it back. And that gives him a little bit more stability so he's not just falling over. Now, this was a non-destructive method, okay? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this. You could technically take this mech and go from here and do some insets, and then hit E to extrude, bring it back just a little bit, and it looks like I've got a little shading error here, so let's grab, yeah, see, the bevel is in the wrong place, so I need to bring the mirror up, and then this bevel is way too big. You can definitely tell that, and let's bring that back until it looks a little better. So you may have to adjust some things, and that's what I'm saying. If you follow a workflow that's similar, and I'll hit A for all, and then shift right click this one, Control C, copy those modifiers. Now they're all the same, and I won't have those shading errors later. Now if you just think it just looks really good and you're not going to join the mesh and you want to change it and get more artistic with it, you can do that. But I recommend you just stay with the same bevel. So now if I inset this, left click, place it, E to extrude, and it can come kind of to the edge. It's fine. And then inset and bring it down a good bit more, and then extrude that back. I've now got somewhat of a gun barrel. And so from here, I could even grab the loops here and Control R and add about 3 loops in there. And while I'm on edge select, I'll zoom in a little bit more, Control middle mouse, and I'll grab the outside edge here with Shift Alt right click. Sometimes you gotta do it twice. And I want to turn on proportional editing, and I'm actually going to move the entire mesh out just a little bit. So G and Y, and then if you roll the middle mouse wheel in and out, you move the whole mesh pretty much. At the further in you move it, the more you can do some really cool stuff with it and kind of move the mesh without creating a whole lot of deformities and making it look really bad, right? So now I've just added some extra definition here, and that looks pretty good. So maybe this also has some pins, which we're going to be using, so hit 3 for the number pad, and I can steal this and hit Shift D and just bring it down and scale it till it's about right there. And I want to scale that on the X, take up the front view, G and X, and that still had the mirror modifier in it, so that's actually perfect. And that's why you got to kind of watch how you're copying these things, because they're all going to mirror. This does not need a mirror, so there's always a cleanup to do at the end. And so now that looks like it could actually rotate a little bit, right? So if I take 3 up here, and this would be more of like a little pump, so I'll hit Shift D and bring this one over here. Scale these down just a little bit. And now you've got a very basic form of a battle mech. And we can definitely take this a step further. And we can come up here. Or rather, we can come to the gun, and I'll jump into Edge Select, and I'll hit Shift R and just add a good bit of loop cuts here. Something like 8. It's pretty good. And then I'm going to go to Face Select, and if I Shift Alt right click, and grab these, then I can now do the Q menu and pull up Extrude Faces Along Nominals. Hold down Shift, and I can bring this in or out and create something a little bit more dramatic, if you will. And so the look is a little bit better. And you can see instantly it definitely steps up the real estate value. Now, if you want to add some more detail, you can come down to the leg top, and it's ideal that you have 2 to 3 main areas of detail. Like the weapons would be high detailed, and then you would have more of a blank, non-detailed but textured area in the middle. The feet could be highly detailed, and then you could pick maybe another spot. And that way your eye has somewhere to rest when you're looking at it, and you'll get the hint of that later. So I'll go over into Face Select, and I do have this loop running up and down the middle. So that's not really going to help me on this one. So I want to hit Shift, right click, and then F, and I'll fill that face area right there. Now, what you want to do is select all of these faces. Sometimes you have to go into wireframe to get them all, and just kind of left click and box select all of these faces. We don't want to select any of the bottom ones, so you can right click off of those, hold down Shift while you're doing it so you don't lose your progress, press Z, go back over to solid mode, and now we can use our checker deselect, which is in our Q quick menu. So if you click that, you get this funky little pattern here, which is checkers. And I don't have a loop cut here, but that's okay. And I can hit Q and extrude faces along nominals, hold down Shift, and kind of bring these out. Okay, so that doesn't look too good. Let's double tap I, and let's bring in a bunch of individual insets, which should look a little better. Now let's extrude those slightly inward, and then you can left click place that and come back over, and now we've got some more areas for the light to kind of catch, and we're bringing detail into certain areas while leaving other areas alone. Does not mean that you can't come over and inset this, because you would need to kind of do that anyways to make it look good. All right, so real quick, this one's being a little bit of a pain, so I'm just going to do the one side. I'll extrude it in, I to inset, extrude in just a little bit more, give it a little bit more of like a gear inset type of look, and then I can bring this one out, and I want to actually Control R, add a couple of loop cuts so I don't deform this. Make sure I'm on Edge Select, Shift Alt select that, scale down. See, I still have proportional editing on, so that's actually good to a point. And we can scale the whole thing down. I'm going to turn off proportional editing and finish scaling that right about there. That looks pretty good, and now I can inset that one more time and make it look like a pen and kind of extrude it back. Throw a couple of loop cuts in there to make sure that looks nice. Now it's not over here, so what we have to do is hit A for all, Q, and if you follow along, you've got your symmetrize, and click symmetrize. Now what you'll notice is that we're symmetrizing on the X axis, and if you pull the drop down menu up, you'll see that it symmetrized from X negative to X positive. So it basically did nothing. We actually don't get anything, and there's a reason for that. This was rotated, therefore it's not on that axis. Now you could come back and Control Z and go back, go to object mode, And what you can do is hit Control A and apply the rotation. And now it's going to work. So if I go back into face select, A for all, double tap it to make sure, and then hit A. And now if I hit symmetrize, it's going to work. And that worked on the X positive, which is where we did our work, to the X negative, which is over here. So you can start to get an idea of how that's working. Now I could have just gone to the Z positive to Z negative respectively, because that's the top that I rotated, and it would have worked that way as well. Now, one important thing to note is that every single time you symmetrize, you get a line in the middle, whether it's going on the x-axis, y-axis, whatever is going around respectively. So Shift Alt, select that line, because you don't want to create a whole bunch of these. Hit X, and instead of delete, we want to dissolve that edge. And it doesn't hurt the mesh at all to do that. As you can see, there's absolutely no shading errors. So that's one way to get your geometry to the other side, and you have it perfectly symmetrical. Now this area would be shifting and rotating, so we would want to come in here and go to face select. I'm going to add in a loop cut directly on this edge. I'm going to add one directly on this edge as well. And what I want to do, and this is another thing you can learn, is if I select this loop, Shift Alt, and I select this one, Shift Alt, double tap G, they move now. And I can scale them on the X and bring them in a touch. So something like that. Now that's a little bit more advanced stuff for your beginner, but still easy enough to learn. So tab into face select, and I want to select this face set and this face set. And then I can extrude these faces along anomalies as well and kind of bring them in just a little bit and give it just a little bit of an idea that it looks like this is spinning on this, and then individually these are spinning. Okay, and so that's kind of the idea, and you want little gaps in here so it looks mechanical, and our bevel helps us achieve that in a pretty big way. Now I know I'm going long here with this very basic mech, but it's pretty important that you get the overall understanding, so when we start doing some more advanced things, you will know. Now, we're going to get into the carver tool and do some very quick basics. I don't like the square shape. Now, with this selected, Control-Shift-X will bring up the carver tool. If you press H for help, you'll see all these little functions here, but I'll walk you through individual things we're doing, and press H again to get rid of it. So you can cut difference booleans. If you press the space bar, you will go from a rectangle, a line, or a circle. And we want to keep shape language going here. So we could probably just add a bevel to the top of this first. So let's tab over into edge mode, because that's going to bug me if we don't do it. And let's add a couple of chamfers here, and then roll the middle mouse wheel up. Bring your drop down up, however you want to call that. Got 5 segments, bring it to 4, and then drop that back down, back to object mode. Okay, so that looks a little better. We can work with that. Now I want to cut these at an angle and just kind of cut them off. And so Control-Shift-X, and I've got the rectangle, but I don't really want to use the rectangle. I want to use the line, and kind of get used to using the line because it's pretty powerful. And you can move around individually. So if I just left click, I can kind of start cutting things the way I want, and then left click, and then left click, and then left click. Okay, and so now I can hit the space bar. All right, everybody, we're going to cut it off here at this video. It's about 45 minutes. So in the next one, we're going to actually go over the carver tool. We're going to get the basics of that, and we're going to do some destructive workflow since we just did some non-destructive work on our mech. Then we're going to texture it, and then we're going to do a cleanup. Okay, and then after that, we can start the big mech. And you stick it out through this thing, you'll be able to make some very cinematic looking, hyper realistic, and you know, take your creative license in which direction you want, and you can make some extra things with this. But the fundamentals you're going to learn with this very basic setup are going to carry you into a more advanced skill set. So when you get to the other mechs and the other robots or the things you want to build, you're going to have a workflow in mind, and it's going to go very, very easily for you. So thank you for watching, guys. Smash that subscribe, smash that like button. It helps the channel. I'm actually trying to do this as a living at some point here. And I really appreciate everybody that's subscribed. You guys are awesome. I'm getting close to 1,000 subscribers. And so, yeah, we're going to put a procedural texture camouflage on this in the next video. It's going to be super exciting. It's super easy, and I'm going to show you how to do it. See you in the next video, guys. Thanks for watching.